The small courthouse on the edge of Maple Creek, a quiet town tucked between rolling farmland and pine woods, rarely saw a crowd like this. By 8:30 in the morning, the hallway outside courtroom 2 was already packed with townspeople, reporters, and curious onlookers, craning their necks for a glimpse of the day's proceedings. Maple Creek was the kind of place where most trials involved petty disputes, property boundaries, unpaid fines, the occasional traffic violation. But today was different. Today's case carried a weight that had pulled the entire community into its orbit. Inside the courtroom, the air felt charged, as if every breath carried static. The wooden pews, polished from decades of use, creaked under the weight of anticipation. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across the spectators. Lawyers shuffled papers, bailiffs whispered into radios, and the faint click of a photographer's camera punctuated the murmur of voices. Near the front of the room, a little girl sat quietly in the first row of benches. Her feet barely reached the edge of the wooden seat, and her hands clutched a small stuffed rabbit with ears worn soft from years of love. Her name was Emily Harper, though most people in the room didn't know it yet. 7 years old, with a curtain of sandy blonde hair framing a face too serious for her age, Emily looked like she had been carved out of the silence itself. Beside her, her mother leaned down occasionally to whisper reassurances, but Emily kept her eyes fixed on the empty witness stand as though waiting for something or someone to arrive. Across the aisle, a uniformed officer stood near a tall, muscular German shepherd. The dog sat perfectly still, ears perked, amber eyes scanning the room with quiet intelligence. His name, stitched in bold letters on his black harness, was Rex. The canine's calm presence drew as many glances as the attorneys and judge. Some spectators smiled at him. A few children whispered excitedly to their parents, but Rex didn't react. He simply sat beside his handler, Officer Mark Reynolds, exuding an almost regal patience. The odd combination of a young child and a police dog at such a high-stakes trial had already sparked a frenzy of speculation. Maple Creek's local newspaper ran a front-page teaser that morning. Little girl to testify in controversial canine case. Reporters from neighboring counties had driven in before sunrise, eager to capture the human and canine interest angle. No one outside the legal teams knew exactly what role the girl or the dog would play, but everyone sensed their presence meant something important. The case itself had become the talk of the town for months. It stemmed from a late-night burglary at Whitaker's Jewelry, one of the oldest businesses in Maple Creek. Thousands of dollars worth of gems and cash were stolen, leaving behind only shattered glass and a trail of muddy footprints. Security cameras had been mysteriously disabled, and for weeks the investigation stalled. Then came Rex. The veteran police dog, trained in scent detection, was brought in to search the scene. Within hours, he located a hidden compartment behind a false wall containing stolen items, and a glove carrying a suspect's DNA. The discovery had been a breakthrough for law enforcement, but a nightmare for the defense. The suspect, a local handyman with a checkered past, claimed he had been framed. His attorneys argued that Rex's findings were unreliable and possibly manipulated. They questioned whether a dog's alert could be trusted as evidence in such a serious case. The entire trial, it seemed, hinged on whether the jury would believe in the instincts of a four-legged officer. And now, for reasons no one fully understood, a child was about to take the stand. At precisely 9 o'clock, the heavy double doors opened, and Judge Eleanor Price entered, her black robe sweeping across the polished floor. The courtroom rose in unison, a chorus of scraping shoes and rustling coats. Judge Price was a tall woman in her late 50s, known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense demeanor. She glanced briefly at the spectators before taking her seat, her gavel striking once with a crisp crack that silenced the room. "Court is now in session," she announced, her voice steady and commanding. State of Ohio versus Daniel Kessler. Prosecution. Are you ready to proceed? The prosecutor, a young man named David Miller, rose from his table. His suit was neatly pressed, though a faint sheen of nervous sweat glistened at his hairline. Yes, Your Honor, he said. The defense attorney, a seasoned litigator with a perpetual frown, gave a curt nod. Ready, Your Honor. Judge Price adjusted her glasses and looked toward the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear testimony today that is unusual in nature. I remind you to keep an open mind and evaluate all evidence presented with fairness and impartiality. Her words only deepened the curiosity humming through the room. Emily shifted slightly in her seat, a stuffed rabbit slipping from her grasp before her mother quickly retrieved it. Though she tried to appear calm, a faint tremor in her small shoulders betrayed her nerves. Officer Reynolds noticed the movement and offered her a gentle nod, his eyes kind but professional. Rex, ever watchful, turned his head toward Emily for a brief moment, his tail giving the slightest flick before settling again. Reporters scribbled furiously, noting every glance and gesture. Cameras, though prohibited from flashing, clicked softly like distant insects. To most observers, it looked like a typical courtroom scene. A judge, attorneys preparing their arguments. But to those watching closely, it was impossible to ignore the silent triangle forming between the girl, the dog, and the case that had brought them here. Emily's mother leaned down once more. Remember, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the ceiling fan. Just tell the truth. That's all anyone wants from you. Emily nodded without looking away from the witness stand. She didn't need reminding. She had been replaying this moment in her head for days, ever since the prosecutor visited their small apartment to explain why her testimony mattered. She didn't fully understand the legal jargon words like credibility, admissibility, and reasonable doubt floated past her like clouds she couldn't catch. But she understood Rex, and she understood what she had seen the night everything changed. Officer Reynolds tightened Rex's harness and whispered a quiet command. The dog straightened, ears flicking forward, as if sensing that his moment, too, was approaching. There was something almost electric in the way Rex held himself alert, but not tense. Powerful, yet gentle. He didn't need to speak to command respect. His presence alone seemed to fill the room with a steady, unshakable truth. Judge Price shuffled some papers and glanced at the clock. Mr. Miller, she said to the prosecutor, you may call your first witness. David Miller cleared his throat and stepped forward. The state calls Officer Mark Reynolds and K-9, Unit Rex to the stand. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd as Reynolds rose and led Rex toward the witness area. The dog trotted beside him with perfect discipline, claws clicking lightly against the wooden floor. Several jurors leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Emily watched them go, her small fingers tightening around the stuffed rabbit. She felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing on her, though no one had called her name yet. Her heartbeat quickened. Soon it would be her turn. Soon she would tell the court what she knew, even if she could only put it into the simplest of words. As Rex settled by the stand, the judge looked down with a faint smile that softened her otherwise stern features. Officer Reynolds, she began, and Rex. Welcome. The trial had begun, and though no one could predict how the day would end, one thing was already certain. The little girl and the police dog were about to change everything. The moment Officer Reynolds and Rex took their places at the witness stand, the entire courtroom seemed to lean forward as one. Every chair, every breath, every quiet shuffle of paper carried a weight of expectation. Even Judge Eleanor Price, who prided herself on maintaining a mask of judicial neutrality, allowed her gaze to linger on the German shepherd for an extra beat. Rex sat poised and perfectly still, his brown eyes scanning the room with a steadiness that spoke of years of disciplined training. For the townspeople of Maple Creek, The sight of Rex was more than just a novelty. He represented the center of a controversy that had quietly torn the community in two. Neighbors who had once waved to each other over picket fences now exchanged cool nods or avoided eye contact altogether. At the heart of it all was a single question. Could the nose of a police dog be trusted to determine the fate of a man's life? The defendant, Daniel Kessler, sat at the defense table in a crisp navy suit, his posture tense but deliberate. He was 42 years old, tall and lean, with close-cropped brown hair and sharp features that gave him an air of controlled defiance. Kessler had lived in Maple Creek for more than a decade, earning his living as a handyman and part-time carpenter. He was known for his skill with woodwork and for being the kind of man who could fix a squeaky door or a leaky faucet with the same easy confidence. But he was also known for something else. Whispers of a temper that flared after a few too many drinks, a short stint in county jail for a bar fight years ago, and a reputation for gambling debts that never quite seemed to disappear. When Whitaker's jewelry was robbed 3 months earlier, suspicion had quickly fallen on Kessler. He had done odd repair jobs for the store in the past and knew the building well. A neighbor claimed to have seen his truck parked near Main Street on the night of the burglary. But there had been no fingerprints, no eyewitness, no security footage to place him at the scene. Without Rex, the case might never have gone to trial at all. Prosecutor David Miller paced slowly before the jury box, his voice steady as he began his opening questions to Officer Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds, can you explain to the court the specific training Rex has undergone?" "Yes, sir," Reynolds replied, his deep voice carrying clearly across the room. "Rex is certified in scent detection, evidence recovery, and search operations. He's trained to detect trace odors anything from narcotics to human scent. He can identify the unique chemical signature left behind by individuals and alert me when he finds something significant. And on the night of the Whitaker's jewelry robbery, what role did Rex play in the investigation?" Reynolds placed a hand on Rex's harness as if to steady the memory. Rex was brought in to perform a scent search inside the store. Within minutes, he alerted on a section of wall behind the main display case. Further inspection revealed a false panel concealing several stolen pieces and a leather glove. That glove later tested positive for Mr. Kessler's DNA. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. The jurors exchanged quick, thoughtful glances. The defense attorney, Martha Greer, rose from her seat with the slow precision of a chess player anticipating her next move. "Officer Reynolds," she began, her tone polite but edged with skepticism, "would you agree that a dog's alert is, at its core, a subjective signal? That you, as his handler, must interpret Rex's behavior to determine whether he has found something?" Reynolds nodded slightly. "I interpret his training-based responses, yes. But his alert is clear and consistent. Rex does not signal unless he detects a target odor." Greer clasped her hands behind her back, pacing a few steps. "And yet, dogs like humans are not infallible, correct? They can make mistakes. They can be influenced by subtle cues from their handlers, even unintentionally. That's why we use double-blind procedures whenever possible," Reynolds replied evenly. "On the night in question, I had no prior knowledge of where evidence might be located. Rex's alert was his own." The back and forth continued, each question and answer threading the courtroom tighter. To some jurors, Reynolds' calm confidence was reassuring. To others, Greer's careful probing planted seeds of doubt. Could a dog, no matter how well trained, truly be beyond human influence? Outside the courtroom, the town's debate was far less measured. In diners and church basements, in grocery store aisles and high school parking lots, Maple Creek's residents argued with the fervor usually reserved for politics or high school football rivalries. Some believed firmly in Rex's abilities, pointing to his decorated career and spotless record. Others worried about the precedent of convicting a man largely on the instincts of an animal. Emily's mother, Sarah Harper, had heard the debates, though she tried to shield her daughter from them. Sitting quietly beside Emily in the courtroom now, Sarah felt the tension as a physical thing, like a storm cloud pressing down on her chest. She knew better than anyone that the town was divided. Some people had even questioned why a child should be allowed to testify in a case of this magnitude. But Sarah also knew what her daughter had seen, and she believed the truth mattered, no matter how small the voice delivering it. As the prosecution presented photographs of the hidden compartment and the recovered glove, Emily's wide eyes flicked toward the evidence screen. She remembered the night vividly, the flashing red and blue lights, the nervous whispers of officers, and Rex padding silently across the broken glass. She remembered the way the dog had stopped, nose pressed to the wall, tail stiffening as if he could sense something no one else could. She had been standing nearby, holding her mother's hand, when Rex turned and looked at her, just for a second, as if to say, "I know." Now, months later, the memory made her squeeze her stuffed rabbit tighter. Judge Price called for a brief recess, and the tension in the room broke like a wave. People stood, stretched, and whispered to one another. Reporters rushed to the hallway to file updates. Daniel Kessler leaned toward his attorney, his jaw tight as he spoke in low, urgent tones. Officer Reynolds crouched to give Rex a quick pat on the side, rewarding him with a quiet, "Good boy." Rex accepted the praise with a flick of his tail, but kept his eyes on the jury, calm and unblinking. During the break, Sarah guided Emily to a corner of the hallway to give her a drink of water. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. Emily nodded, but didn't speak. She glanced back toward the courtroom doors, her mind already on the moment she knew was coming. The prosecutor had explained that her testimony would follow Officer Reynolds. She was nervous, of course she was, but she also felt a strange sense of purpose. She hadn't forgotten the night of the robbery, and she hadn't forgotten Rex's quiet certainty. Inside the courtroom, Judge Price conferred briefly with the attorneys. When the recess ended, and everyone returned to their seats, the atmosphere felt heavier than before, as though the break had only allowed the tension to settle deeper. "Members of the jury," Judge Price said, her gavel bringing the room to order, "you will now hear testimony from a civilian witness whose perspective is considered vital to the sequence of events on the night of the alleged burglary. I remind you once again to weigh all evidence carefully and without bias." David Miller stood and cleared his throat. "The state calls Emily Harper to the stand." A collective rustle swept through the room as heads turned toward the small girl in the front row. Emily froze for a heartbeat, her fingers tightening around the soft fabric of her stuffed rabbit. Her mother gave her an encouraging nod. "It's time," Sarah whispered. Emily rose, her legs trembling slightly, but carrying her forward. The courtroom seemed to stretch before her like a long, echoing tunnel as she made her way to the witness stand. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she kept her eyes ahead, her small chin lifted with quiet determination. Behind her, Rex watched with a steady gaze, as if silently guarding her path. The courtroom door creaked as it closed behind Emily, sealing her inside a world that felt far too large for someone so small. The sound echoed in her ears like a drumbeat, each thud of her heart keeping pace with her steps as she climbed the 3 wooden stairs to the witness stand. The bailiff, a kindly man with graying hair and a warm smile, bent slightly so that he could meet her eyes. "Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" he asked gently. Emily tightened her grip on her stuffed rabbit, the fabric worn thin from countless bedtime hugs. "I do," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper, but clear enough for the judge to hear. Judge Price leaned forward, softening her normally stern tone. "You may hold your toy if it makes you feel more comfortable, Emily. You can also take your time when answering any questions." Do you understand? Emily nodded. Yes, ma'am. Her feet barely reached the bottom rung of the witness chair. She tucked them beneath her, clutching the rabbit tightly in her lap. For a brief moment, her wide blue eyes darted toward the jury box. 12 strangers stared back, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and gentle encouragement. Then she spotted Rex near the stand, sitting like a statue beside Officer Reynolds. His amber eyes met hers, and something inside her steadied. The prosecutor, David Miller, approached slowly, careful not to overwhelm her. "Good morning, Emily," he said with a kind smile. "Do you remember me?" "Yes," she replied softly. "You came to my house. That's right. I came to talk to you and your mom a few weeks ago. Thank you for being here today. I know this can feel a little scary." Emily glanced toward her mother, who sat in the front row with her hands clasped tightly together. "It's okay," Emily said, more to herself than anyone else. "Emily," Miller continued, his voice patient and calm, "can you tell the jury where you were on the night of the burglary at Whitaker's Jewelry?" Emily took a breath. "I was with my mom. We were walking home from Grandma's house. We saw the police cars on Main Street, and Mom said we had to stay back, but then a nice officer told us we could wait near the sidewalk. That's when I saw Rex." At the mention of the dog's name, a faint murmur swept through the courtroom. "Can you tell us what happened when you saw Rex?" Miller asked. Emily's eyes lit up just a little, the first sign of excitement breaking through her nervousness. "He was sniffing around the store. He walked really slow, like he was thinking about something. Then he stopped and looked at me." Miller tilted his head. "He looked at you?" "Yes, he stopped and stared, like he knew I was watching. Then he put his nose on the wall and sat down." "Did anyone tell him to do that?" "No," Emily said firmly. "He just did it." And then the officer said, "Good boy," and started looking at the wall. The jury leaned forward in near-perfect unison, drawn in by the child's simple but vivid description. There was something disarming about her account, no technical jargon, no rehearsed testimony, just a straightforward memory of what she had seen. Miller nodded. "Emily, can you tell us how Rex seemed to you that night?" Emily thought for a moment, her small brow furrowing. "He was sure," she said finally, like he already knew where to go. He didn't look confused. He just knew. Defense attorney Martha Greer rose from her chair, adjusting her glasses. "Objection, Your Honor," she said. "The witness is speculating about the dog's mental state." Judge Price raised a hand. "Sustained. Mr. Miller, please rephrase." Miller smiled apologetically. "Of course, Your Honor. Emily, can you describe what Rex did that made you think he was sure?" Emily hugged her rabbit closer. "He sat very still and wagged his tail just a little, like he was saying, 'Here it is.' He didn't move until the officer came over." "Thank you, Emily. That's very helpful." Miller gave her a reassuring nod before stepping back. Greer approached next, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She crouched slightly to meet Emily at eye level, her expression gentle. "Hello, Emily. My name is Ms. Greer. I just want to ask you a few questions." "Is that okay?" Emily nodded, her small voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Now, you said Rex looked at you before he sat down. Could it be that he was just looking around the room? Maybe he wasn't looking at you specifically?" Emily blinked, considering the question. "Maybe," she admitted. "But it felt like he was looking at me." "I understand," Greer said kindly. "And when Rex sat down, did you hear anyone, maybe the officer, make a sound or give a command?" Emily shook her head. "No, nobody said anything." Greer gave a small smile and stood. "Thank you, Emily. You've been very brave." As the defense attorney returned to her seat, Emily let out a tiny breath of relief. She glanced toward Rex again, and the dog gave the slightest tilt of his head, as if acknowledging her courage. For the jurors, the testimony carried a quiet power. They weren't just hearing about a dog alerting on a hidden compartment. They were seeing the event through the eyes of a child who had no reason to embellish or deceive. Emily's words painted a picture of a dog acting purely on instinct, unprompted by human cues. Judge Price called for a short recess to allow Emily to step down. The bailiff helped her from the stand as she walked back to her mother's side. Sarah gathered her in a tight embrace, whispering praise into her hair. "You did so well," Sarah said, her voice trembling with relief. "I'm so proud of you." Emily smiled faintly, but kept her eyes on Rex. Something about the dog's presence gave her a sense of safety that words couldn't explain. As the courtroom emptied for the break, Prosecutor Miller remained by the witness stand, reviewing his notes. He knew the child's testimony hadn't introduced new forensic evidence, but it had done something equally important. It had humanized the case. Jurors might debate the science of scent detection, but they would not easily forget the image of a little girl describing a dog who just knew. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner near the exit, Defense Attorney Greer leaned toward her client. "We'll emphasize the lack of physical command," she whispered. "We can argue it was coincidence. A dog sitting down doesn't prove certainty." Kessler's jaw tightened. "The jury likes her," he muttered. "They like the dog, too." "They're not here to like anyone," Greer said, though her eyes betrayed the same concern. "They're here to decide based on facts." But both of them knew that facts alone often didn't win trials. Stories did. And today, the story belonged to a quiet little girl and the dog who seemed to share a secret only they understood. When the recess ended, the spectators filed back in, their conversations hushed but urgent. Some whispered about Emily's bravery, others about the eerie precision of Rex's actions. Reporters exchanged knowing looks as they tapped out early drafts of their articles. Everyone sensed that something had shifted, even if they couldn't quite name it. Emily rested her head against her mother's shoulder, exhausted but strangely calm. She had done what she came to do. She had told the truth in her own small way. And though she didn't fully grasp the legal stakes, she understood one thing with the absolute clarity only a child could possess. Rex wasn't guessing that night. He wasn't lucky. He knew. Across the room, Rex lay quietly at Officer Reynolds' feet, his breathing slow and steady. To the untrained eye, he looked like any other well-behaved dog. But Emily knew better. She felt it deep in her chest, the same certainty she'd felt that night on Main Street. Rex had found something no one else could. And in doing so, he had found a way to make his truth heard, even if it had to come through the soft, unwavering words of a 7-year-old girl. When the recess ended, the courtroom filled again with a restless hush. The jurors returned to their seats, with the careful deliberation of people who knew every glance, every pause would soon carry weight. Spectators squeezed back into the wooden pews, their whispers softening into silence as Judge Eleanor Price re-entered and gave a single measured strike of the gavel. "Court is back in session," she announced. "Prosecution, you may continue." Prosecutor David Miller stood, smoothing the front of his navy suit. He cast a quick glance toward the witness stand, where Emily Harper had already taken her place once more. The little girl sat straight-backed, her stuffed rabbit perched carefully on her lap like a silent companion. Across the room, Officer Reynolds rested a reassuring hand on Rex's harness, the dog's amber eyes fixed on the girl. Miller approached with a calm, deliberate pace. "Emily," he said gently, "you've done very well so far. I just have a few more questions, if that's all right." Emily nodded. "Okay. Earlier, you told us that Rex stopped at a wall inside the jewelry store and sat down. You also said he looked at you first. Can you tell the jury what you were feeling at that moment?" Emily's fingers tightened around the rabbit's worn ears. "It felt important," she said after a pause. like something big was about to happen. He looked at me, and it was like he was saying, "Watch this." A faint ripple of murmurs passed through the gallery before Judge Price's raised hand restored order. "And when Rex sat down," Miller continued, "did you see anyone, Officer Reynolds, or anyone else touch the wall or point to it before Rex did?" "No," Emily said firmly. "He just sat down all by himself." Miller nodded, letting the words settle over the jury before stepping back. "Thank you, Emily. No further questions." Defense Attorney Martha Greer stood, her expression composed, but eyes sharp. She moved toward the stand with the careful grace of someone balancing on a wire. "Emily," she began, "you've been very brave today, and I want you to know we all appreciate your help. I just have one more question for you. Dogs can sit for many reasons, can't they? Sometimes they sit when they're tired, or when they hear a sound." Emily tilted her head slightly. "Sometimes," she admitted. "So it's possible Rex sat down for a reason that had nothing to do with finding anything, isn't it?" Emily frowned, her small brow knitting in thought. "I guess it's possible," she said slowly. Then her eyes lifted toward Rex, who watched her with patient stillness. But it didn't feel like that. He wasn't just sitting. He knew. Greer hesitated, sensing the weight those two words carried, then gave a polite nod. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Price offered Emily a kind smile. "You've been very helpful, young lady. You may step down now." As Emily climbed carefully down from the witness chair, every creak of the wooden steps seemed amplified. The gallery remained utterly silent, as though the room itself were holding its breath. When she reached her mother's waiting arms, Sarah Harper pulled her close, whispering something that made Emily's shoulders relax at last. With the child excused, the attention shifted back to the prosecution. Miller rose again, addressing the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've now heard testimony from both the officer and an unbiased witness. You've seen that Rex acted without command, without influence, and with unmistakable certainty. The defense may question science, but they cannot question the truth of what you just heard." He gestured subtly toward Rex, who remained motionless beside the stand. "This is not a case of coincidence. This is a case of skill, training, and instinct, a case where the evidence speaks through action." The jurors listened intently, some scribbling notes, others watching Rex as though they could somehow read his thoughts. Defense Attorney Greer rose for a brief cross-examination of Officer Reynolds, but her carefully measured questions about handler influence and canine error felt less sharp after Emily's quiet testimony. Each attempt to sow doubt seemed to land softly, like pebbles tossed against a stone wall. During a brief pause, the courtroom seemed to settle into a fragile equilibrium. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm stripes across the polished wooden floor. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams of light, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. Emily, now seated beside her mother, rested her chin on the stuffed rabbit's head. She wasn't following the lawyer's words anymore. Her eyes remained on Rex, who occasionally flicked an ear, but otherwise stayed perfectly still. In her child's mind, the case felt simple. Rex had found the hiding place because Rex knew. Nothing the adults said could change that. When the final question was asked and the last exhibit submitted, Judge Price called for a late afternoon break. As the gavel struck, the tension that had been building all day seemed to release all at once. Spectators exhaled, reporters hurried for the door to relay the day's dramatic turn, and jurors stretched stiff limbs before filing into their deliberation room. Outside, the courthouse lawn buzzed with chatter. Townspeople debated in hushed clusters. Could a dog's certainty really be enough? What about the glove with Kessler's DNA? Didn't the little girl's words feel too powerful to ignore? Inside, Rex remained beside Officer Reynolds, his posture unchanged. To him, The day's drama was irrelevant. He had done his job, as he always did, with quiet precision and unshakable focus. Emily leaned into her mother's side, exhausted but strangely peaceful. She didn't understand the legal intricacies or the burden of proof. What she did understand was simpler, truer, and perhaps more persuasive than anything else that had been said that day. Two small words, he knew, had left the courtroom echoing with a truth no cross-examination could fully erase. As the late afternoon light dimmed behind the courthouse windows, the crowd filed back into the courtroom with an almost reverent quiet. The air felt heavier now, as if every molecule carried the weight of what had been said and what might come next. Judge Eleanor Price adjusted her glasses, glancing over the jury as they settled in, their faces drawn with the fatigue of careful listening, but sharpened by the gravity of the decision ahead. Emily Harper sat once again in the front row beside her mother. Her stuffed rabbit rested on her lap, its faded ears drooping as if tired from the day's events. Though Emily had already given her testimony, the little girl's presence seemed to radiate through the room, drawing subtle glances from jurors and spectators alike. It was as though her quiet honesty lingered like an echo that refused to fade. Prosecutor David Miller rose from his seat with a sense of purpose. He moved toward the jury box slowly, allowing each step to claim the attention of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but charged, "you have heard evidence, seen photographs, and listened to experts. But today, you also heard something far more powerful, a truth delivered not by a scientist or a lawyer, but by a child." He paused, letting the words breathe. Emily Harper had nothing to gain from being here. She spoke to you with the clarity of someone too young to calculate, too innocent to manipulate. When asked about Rex, she said 2 words. He knew. The phrase hung in the air like a bell's clear chime. Even those who had been scribbling notes looked up, caught by the simplicity of the statement. Miller stepped closer to the jury, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Think about what that means. A dog cannot testify. He cannot explain how his nose works or why he sat in front of a hidden wall. But Emily saw something in his behavior, something unmistakable. She saw certainty. She saw truth. Rex knew. Several jurors exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful, some even softened. The prosecutor straightened, his tone sharpening again. "This is not superstition. This is training. This is science." Rex followed assent unprompted and unswayed to evidence that led us to the defendant. The glove, the DNA, the stolen jewelry. Facts do not lie, and neither did that dog. He stepped back, allowing the echo of his words to settle. For a moment, the courtroom was so silent that the faint hum of the ceiling fan seemed deafening. Defense attorney Martha Greer rose with measured composure. Her dark suit seemed almost to absorb the light as she approached the jury, her expression calm, but her eyes intent. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "children are honest, yes. But children also see the world in ways that are not bound by evidence. Emily believes Rex knew, but belief is not proof." Her tone sharpened slightly. "A dog may be well trained, but no animal is infallible. You cannot convict a man of a serious crime because a child felt that a dog was certain. The prosecution would have you treat a 7-year-old's impression as scientific fact. But this is a court of law, not a place for impressions." Greer gestured toward the defense table, where Daniel Kessler sat, rigid and unsmiling. "My client deserves the same standard of proof as anyone else. Reasonable doubt remains. There is no fingerprint placing him inside Whitaker's jewelry. There is no video, no eyewitness, no confession. A glove found behind a wall is not enough. And a dog's actions interpreted through a child's eyes cannot replace hard evidence." She paused, her voice softening as she looked back at the jury. "I ask you to remember your duty, to decide based on facts, not feelings. Do not let a child's innocence be twisted into a weapon of persuasion." Greer returned to her seat with the precision of someone who knew she had delivered every word she could. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of competing arguments pressing down like a storm cloud. Judge Price surveyed the room. "Members of the jury," she said, her voice measured, "you will soon be asked to deliberate. Remember the instructions given to you. Consider the evidence carefully and set aside emotion. You may retire to the jury room when ready." The jurors filed out, leaving behind a vacuum of quiet tension. Spectators whispered softly, their conversations a tapestry of competing predictions. Some murmured that the defense had made a strong point. Others insisted that Emily's words carried a truth logic could not dismiss. Emily leaned into her mother's side, her eyes fixed on Rex. The dog lay calmly at Officer Reynolds's feet, his breathing steady, his amber eyes unblinking. Emily felt a tiny spark of pride and comfort. She had said what she came to say. Whether or not the adults believed her, Rex knew the truth, and that was enough. Time stretched thin as the jury deliberated. Minutes felt like hours. Outside, the last streaks of daylight melted into the soft indigo of early evening. Inside, the tension grew heavier with each passing second. Even Rex seemed to sense the shift, his ears flicking slightly, though he remained composed. Finally, the bailiff re-entered, his face unreadable. "Your Honor," he announced, "the jury has reached a verdict." A ripple of energy surged through the courtroom. Spectators straightened. Attorneys exchanged quick glances. Emily's small hand tightened around her mother's. Judge Price nodded firmly. "Bring the jury in." The 12 men and women filed back into their seats, their expressions solemn but resolved. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with streaks of silver in her hair, clutched a folded piece of paper. "Madam Foreperson," Judge Price said, "has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the woman replied, her voice steady. "Please hand the verdict to the bailiff." The bailiff passed the paper to the judge, who read it silently before returning it. Her eyes, sharp but neutral, scanned the courtroom. "In the case of the state of Ohio versus Daniel Kessler," she said clearly, "on the charge of burglary in the first degree, we the jury find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp swept the room, followed by an immediate hush. Kessler slumped slightly in his chair, his jaw tightening as the words sank in. Greer placed a steadying hand on his arm, her face an impassive mask. Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned her gaze toward Rex, who remained as calm as ever, as though he had known the outcome long before the humans did. The quiet strength of the dog seemed to fill the room, a silent confirmation of the truth that had guided the case from the very beginning. The judge thanked the jury for their service and set a date for sentencing. Spectators began to stir, but conversations were hushed, as though everyone recognized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Reporters rushed to the hallway to send their dispatches, already crafting headlines around the little girl's 2 words. Emily looked up at her mother, who brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead. "It's over now," Sarah whispered. But Emily shook her head slightly, her eyes still on Rex. "No," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's not over. Rex still knows." Her words were too quiet for anyone else to hear, but Rex's ears twitched as if he'd caught them. His amber eyes met hers, steady and knowing, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though the bond between them carried something beyond language, a quiet understanding that justice, like truth, sometimes speaks in the simplest of ways. The courthouse emptied slowly that night, as if no one wanted to be the first to leave the charged atmosphere that lingered in the high-ceilinged chamber. Reporters huddled at the bottom of the marble steps, scribbling frantically or dictating into phones. Cameras clicked and flashed, catching the faces of jurors as they slipped quietly into waiting cars. Everyone wanted a statement, a quote, a glimpse of the people whose decision had just made local history. Inside, Emily Harper sat with her mother in a quiet alcove near the clerk's office. The heavy wooden benches creaked beneath their weight, and the faint hum of the courthouse's aging radiator filled the silence. Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Though the long day had left her eyes heavy, there was a light in them that no exhaustion could dim. Officer Reynolds approached softly, his tall frame casting a long shadow along the hallway wall. Rex padded beside him, nails clicking softly against the polished floor. Emily perked up instantly. "Hi, Rex," she said, her small voice brightening the dim corridor. Rex wagged his tail once, a slow, steady sweep, before leaning slightly into her outstretched hand. His warm fur seemed to carry the weight of calm and certainty, the same presence that had carried her through the day. "You were very brave today," Officer Reynolds said, crouching slightly to meet Emily's gaze. "Not everyone can sit up there and speak the truth the way you did." Emily looked down at the rabbit in her lap, then back at Rex. "It wasn't scary when he was there," she said simply. "He knew," Reynolds nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yes," he said quietly. He did. Outside the courthouse, the night air felt different, sharper, cleaner, as if the town itself was exhaling after holding its breath for weeks. People lingered on the sidewalks, sharing quiet conversations about the trial's surprising turn. Many spoke not of the glove or the DNA evidence, but of the little girl and the dog. Headlines were already racing across the internet. Child's words seal verdict in high profile. Burglary case. 2 words from a 7-year-old tipped the scales of justice. He knew. Police dog becomes key witness in landmark trial. Legal analysts on late-night broadcasts debated the implications. Some praised the jury for recognizing the strength of circumstantial evidence and expert testimony. Others questioned whether the emotional power of a child's testimony had overshadowed strict legal reasoning. In the living rooms of strangers across the state, Emily's soft voice replayed in sound bites and video clips. Each time, her 2 simple words, he knew, cut through the noise of legal jargon and procedural complexity, leaving a mark that numbers and statistics never could. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the police department's K-9 unit, Officer Reynolds removed Rex's harness and brushed a hand along the dog's broad shoulders. "You did good today, buddy," he murmured. "Real good." Rex stood still, amber eyes catching the dim light of the kennel room. To him, it had been another day of work-scent trails, commands, and instinct. He didn't understand the cameras or the verdict. What he knew was simpler: a scent hidden in the wall, a glove that shouldn't have been there, and the satisfaction of finding what others could not. Reynolds lingered for a moment, the day's events replaying in his mind. He'd testified in court dozens of times before, but never had he seen a child shift the course of a trial with such quiet certainty. Emily's words had carried a weight that neither he nor Rex could have delivered on their own. For Emily, life after the trial began with small changes she didn't fully understand. The next morning, neighbors stopped by with cookies and warm smiles. Teachers at her school crouched down to tell her how proud they were. Children whispered her name in the hallways, not unkindly, but with the awe reserved for someone who had stepped into a world far beyond playground games and spelling tests. Sarah Harper tried to keep life steady. Breakfasts were the same, bedtime stories unchanged. But she could feel the shift, too. Reporters had called the house 3 times before noon, and a local TV station requested a short interview. Sarah politely declined each request, determined to protect her daughter's quiet courage from becoming a spectacle. Emily herself seemed unchanged on the surface. She still lined her stuffed animals along the edge of her bed. She still liked chocolate milk and cartoons. Yet there was a new steadiness in her, a quiet understanding of the power of truth. "Mom," she asked one evening as they folded laundry together, "will Rex have to go to court again?" "Maybe someday," Sarah said gently, folding a soft blue towel. "He's a police dog. That's part of his job." Emily thought for a moment, her small hands smoothing the ears of her rabbit. "Do you think he knows he helped?" Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. "I think he always knows when he's done something good." The convicted man, Daniel Kessler, remained largely silent in the days following the verdict. His attorney released a brief statement announcing plans to appeal, citing concerns about the influence of a child's testimony on the jury. But even within legal circles, few believed the appeal would overturn the decision. The physical evidence, the glove, the DNA, was too strong. Still, Emily's words had undeniably shaped the narrative. In interviews, jurors later admitted that her quiet conviction lingered in their minds during deliberation. "One of us mentioned it," a juror told a local reporter. "We kept coming back to those two words. He knew. It wasn't that we thought the dog was magical. It was that the child saw something we all felt, but couldn't describe. It reminded us that truth isn't always complicated." Weeks later, Emily and her mother visited the police station to see Rex again. The K-9 unit welcomed them warmly, offering coffee for Sarah and juice for Emily. Officer Reynolds greeted them with a grin, Rex trotting at his side, tail wagging at the familiar faces. Emily knelt down and hugged the dog tightly, her cheek pressed against his thick fur. "Hi, hero," she whispered. Rex leaned into her embrace, accepting the title without question. Reynolds chuckled. "He's been getting a lot of that lately," he said. "But I think he likes hearing it from you best." Emily pulled back just enough to look into the dog's amber eyes. "You knew," she said softly, repeating the words that had changed everything. Rex blinked, calm and unbothered, his gaze steady and sure. Reynolds crouched down beside them. "You know," he said, looking from the girl to the dog, "sometimes the hardest part of this job is remembering to trust what you can't see." You trusted him, and because of that, the truth came out. Emily smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling in quiet satisfaction. She didn't need the news articles, the legal arguments, or the endless adult discussions to understand what had happened. She had trusted Rex, and Rex had been right. That night, as mother and daughter drove home beneath a sky scattered with stars, Emily gazed out the car window in thoughtful silence. The town lay quiet, its streets washed in the soft glow of streetlights. Somewhere out there, Rex was sleeping after another long day, his job done, his instincts once again proven true. Emily clutched her rabbit a little tighter and whispered to herself, almost like a bedtime prayer. He knew. The words floated into the quiet car, simple and unshakable, a reminder that sometimes the clearest truths come not from science or argument, but from the unspoken bond between a child, a dog, and the certainty of justice. In the weeks following the trial, the small Ohio town where it all unfolded seemed to hum with a quiet electricity. The courthouse stood, as it always had, stoic and unchanging, but for those who had sat inside its oak-paneled walls, something fundamental felt altered. The story of a little girl, a dog, and two simple words had traveled far beyond the county line. Newspapers across the country picked it up, radio stations debated it, and national morning shows replayed Emily Harper's gentle voice, her words lingering like a haunting refrain. He knew. For Emily, life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though normal now carried a different shape. School mornings were the same cereal at the kitchen table, hurried shoelaces, the hum of the school bus engine, but her classmates watched her with new eyes. Some approached shyly, asking if Rex really understood everything. Others just smiled from a distance, whispering to each other as she passed. Emily remained mostly unfazed. She still loved art class, still liked recess more than math, and still carried her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm whenever she could. But inside, something had shifted. The trial had planted in her a quiet awareness of courage, not the loud, daring kind of courage she read about in storybooks, but the steady, unshakable kind that comes from speaking the truth, even when no one else fully understands it. At the Harper household, Sarah noticed the change as well. Her daughter, once hesitant to speak up in class or even at family gatherings, now carried herself with a subtle new confidence. Emily still asked questions, hundreds of them, as children do, but they were deeper now, thoughtful in a way that made Sarah pause before answering. One rainy Saturday morning, as they baked muffins together, Emily looked up from the mixing bowl and asked, "Mom, how do people know what's true if it's not something you can see?" Sarah wiped flour from her hands, thinking carefully. "Sometimes," she said, "you can't see the truth. Sometimes you just feel it. And sometimes you trust someone or something that helps you find it. Like Rex?" Sarah smiled. "Exactly like Rex." Emily nodded, satisfied, and went back to stirring, her small brow furrowed in concentration, as if she were mixing not just flour and sugar, but the ingredients of a lesson she would carry forever. Meanwhile, the police department found itself at the center of unexpected attention. Letters poured in from across the country, thank you notes, drawings from children, even offers to sponsor Rex's training and care. Television crews requested interviews with Officer Reynolds and his four-legged partner. Though polite, Reynolds declined most requests, preferring to keep the focus on the work rather than the fame. Still, he couldn't avoid the quiet pride he felt each time he clipped on Rex's harness for another shift. "You're a celebrity now," he teased one morning as he scratched behind the dog's ears. Rex, unimpressed by celebrity, simply wagged his tail once and waited for the day's assignment. To Reynolds, the trial had reinforced something he already knew, but rarely said aloud. That trust between handler and dog, between evidence and intuition, was at the heart of justice. Watching Emily testify had driven that truth home in a way no training exercise ever could. Daniel Kessler, the convicted burglar, remained largely silent in the county jail as he awaited sentencing. His attorney filed a notice of appeal, arguing that the emotional weight of a child's testimony had unfairly influenced the jury. But legal experts interviewed by local news outlets were skeptical of its success. The physical evidence was overwhelming, one analyst explained during a televised panel. The glove with his DNA, the scent trail leading to the hidden compartment, those alone would have secured a conviction. Emily's testimony may have resonated, but it didn't create the evidence. It simply gave the jury a human lens through which to view it. Even so, the public couldn't stop talking about Emily's 2 words. People debated their meaning at dinner tables and in coffee shops. Some argued that her statement was a metaphor for trust in the bond between human and animal. Others insisted it was a child's intuition, something beyond science. Whatever the interpretation, few denied the power those words carried. One chilly evening, nearly a month after the verdict, Emily and her mother were invited to a small community event at the town hall. It was not a formal ceremony, just a gathering of neighbors who wanted to celebrate the people and animals who had helped bring justice. The hall smelled faintly of coffee and baked goods as families mingled, children darting between clusters of chatting adults. A long table displayed homemade thank you cards decorated with glitter and stickers, many featuring drawings of Rex with his alert ears and noble stance. When Officer Reynolds entered with Rex at his side, the crowd broke into gentle applause. Rex paused, ears flicking, before continuing forward with his usual quiet dignity. Emily's eyes lit up the moment she spotted him. "Rex!" she exclaimed, darting forward before remembering to slow down, mindful of the dog's working status. Reynolds smiled, giving her a small nod of permission. Emily knelt to hug Rex, her arms wrapping around his strong neck. "Hi, hero," she whispered, repeating the nickname she'd given him during their last visit. Rex leaned into her embrace, tail wagging in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Reynolds crouched beside them. "He remembers you," he said. "I think he always will." Emily looked up at the officer, her eyes wide with the simple certainty of a child. "I'll remember him too," she said softly. "Because he knew." The officer swallowed against a sudden tightness in his throat. "Yeah," he said. He did. Later that evening, after speeches of gratitude and trays of cookies had been shared, Sarah guided Emily toward the exit. Outside, the town square glowed with the warm lights of early winter decorations. Snowflakes began to drift lazily from the dark sky, catching the street lamps as they fell. Emily paused on the steps, looking back at the hall where Rex and Officer Reynolds were still surrounded by neighbors offering thanks. She felt a quiet warmth spread through her chest, a mix of pride, relief, and something she couldn't quite name. "Mom," she said, her voice small but steady, "do you think other people will know now? That you can trust dogs to tell the truth?" Sarah smiled, tucking a scarf tighter around her daughter's shoulders. "I think a lot of people already knew," she said. "But maybe now they'll listen a little closer." Emily nodded, watching as a single snowflake landed on the sleeve of her coat. It melted instantly, leaving only a tiny glimmer of water that caught the light before fading away. As the days passed, the story of Emily and Rex continued to ripple outward. Schools invited K-9 units for demonstrations. Children wrote essays about courage and trust. Donations to local animal shelters increased. Even in places far beyond Ohio, people found themselves repeating the words of a 7-year-old girl, marveling at their quiet power. For Emily, life settled gently into this new normal. She didn't think of herself as a hero. To her, she had only told the truth about what she had seen, a truth as simple and solid as Rex's steady gaze. But in a world often clouded by doubt and complexity, her words had shone like a small, steady light. And though the trial was over, though the headlines would eventually fade, the bond between a little girl and a police dog remained, a reminder that sometimes justice begins not with grand gestures, but with the unshakable trust of a child and the silent certainty of a dog who simply knew. Winter deepened in the small Ohio town, blanketing the streets in a quiet hush. Weeks had passed since the verdict, yet the story of the little girl and the police dog continued to ripple outward, leaving gentle but undeniable marks on the people who had witnessed it. Snow lay piled along the courthouse steps now, softening the sharp lines of the old stone building where everything had changed. Though the trial was over, its echoes lingered like the faint scent of pine after a snowfall, subtle but impossible to ignore. For Emily Harper, life had slowly found its rhythm again. The trial that once loomed over every conversation had become a memory she carried like a secret stone in her pocket, heavy at first, but smoother with time. School days returned to their familiar pattern of spelling quizzes, art projects, and giggling recess games. Friends who once whispered about her testimony now simply asked if she wanted to trade snacks at lunch or join their jump rope line. Yet Emily herself had changed in quiet, unspoken ways. She noticed details others missed, a sound in the distance, the flicker of an expression, the faint scent of rain before the clouds broke. She wasn't sure if it was because of Rex or because speaking the truth had sharpened her senses, but the world seemed clearer now, more layered. Sometimes at night, she would sit by her bedroom window with her stuffed rabbit and look at the stars. She would think of Rex, wondering if he was patrolling dark streets or resting after a long shift. "I wonder what he knows tonight," she whispered once to the rabbit, the words a soft echo in the still room. At the police department, Rex's life remained unchanged in the ways that mattered most. He trained, patrolled, and worked with the same calm precision that had defined his career. But within the department, there was a new respect or recognition that his quiet instincts had played a pivotal role in a case that captured the nation's attention. Officers from neighboring counties stopped by to meet him. Children sent him hand-drawn cards of thanks. Officer Reynolds accepted the attention with the same steady composure as his partner. He answered questions politely, gave careful interviews when necessary, and always redirected credit to the team, the training, and the evidence. Yet when he was alone with Rex, brushing his coat or checking his gear, he sometimes found himself reflecting on the moment when Emily spoke those two simple words. She saw it too, he murmured one evening while fastening Rex's harness before a night shift. She just knew. Rex blinked his amber eyes, patient and unbothered, as if to say that knowing had never been the point. Finding the truth was simply his job. Across town, Daniel Kessler awaited sentencing in the county jail. His attorney continued to prepare an appeal, though few believed it would succeed. Journalists occasionally called the Harper household, asking for Emily's thoughts on the upcoming sentencing. Sarah politely declined each request, determined to keep her daughter's life private and peaceful. When Emily overheard one of these calls, she tilted her head thoughtfully. "Mom," she asked, "will he have to stay in jail for a long time?" Sarah crouched to meet her gaze. "That will be up to the judge," she said gently. "But remember, the most important part is that the truth came out." Emily nodded slowly. "Because Rex found it," Sarah smiled. "Because Rex found it, and because you were brave enough to say what you saw." Emily considered this quietly. "But Rex knew first," she said at last, a small smile tugging at her lips. The day of sentencing arrived under a bright but frigid sky. Though the courthouse lacked the packed crowds of the trial, a modest group of townspeople gathered to witness the final chapter. Sarah chose to keep Emily home, protecting her from the cold and the lingering scrutiny of reporters. Instead, they baked cookies together and watched the snow fall outside their kitchen window. When Officer Reynolds later called to update them, Kessler had received a significant prison sentence as Sarah thanked him warmly. Emily, listening from her stool, simply nodded. "Okay," she said when the call ended. "Now it's really over." But even as she said it, she knew that over was not the same as forgotten. Spring eventually arrived, melting the heavy snow and replacing it with a gentle scent of budding flowers. On a crisp April afternoon, Sarah drove Emily to a small community park for a canine demonstration hosted by the police department. Children squealed with excitement as officers explained how the dogs tracked scents, searched for hidden items, and worked to keep the town safe. When Rex trotted into the field with Officer Reynolds, the crowd erupted in cheers. He moved with effortless grace, ears pricked and eyes alert, his presence commanding quiet admiration. Emily's heart leapt with recognition. "Can I?" she asked, tugging at her mother's sleeve. Sarah nodded, and together they made their way to the front of the crowd. When Reynolds spotted them, a slow grin spread across his face. "Well, look who it is," he said warmly. "Our honorary junior officer." Emily knelt in the grass, her small arms wrapping around Rex's neck. "Hi, hero," she whispered, the familiar words carrying a new depth of affection. Rex leaned into her embrace, tail wagging in a deliberate, steady rhythm. Reynolds crouched beside them. "He still remembers," he said softly. "I'll always remember too," Emily replied, looking into the dog's amber eyes. "Because he knew." Reynolds swallowed a sudden tightness in his throat. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He always knows." As the demonstration ended and families began to drift away, Emily lingered in the park. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the budding trees, casting a golden glow across the field where Rex now sat beside Reynolds, watching the last of the crowd. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill her lungs. She thought of the corkroom, the wall where Rex had sat so surely, the way his eyes had met hers, before anyone else understood what was hidden there. She thought of how 2 simple words had carried more truth than any argument or expert testimony. He knew. The phrase felt less like a statement now, and more like a lesson about trust, about instinct, about the quiet courage to believe in something beyond what can be explained. As Sarah called her toward the car, Emily gave Rex one last hug, pressing her cheek to his fur. "Thank you," she whispered. Rex stayed perfectly still, as if acknowledging her gratitude without needing to understand it. His steady presence carried all the answers she required. That night, as Emily drifted toward sleep, she held her stuffed rabbit close and replayed the day in her mind. The park, the sunlight, Rex's warm fur beneath her fingers, all of it blended into a calm certainty that wrapped around her like a blanket. The world, she realized, was full of things people couldn't always explain. But some truths didn't need explanation. Some truths simply were. And somewhere out there, Rex was probably settling into his own night's rest, ready for whatever work tomorrow would bring. Emily smiled in the darkness, her final thought as steady and sure as the dog who had inspired it. He knew. The words were as simple as ever, but now they carried the quiet power of something eternal, a reminder that courage and truth, once spoken, can never be silenced.